and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast. Have you ever thought, what is all of this sales enablement about? And how does it fit with the sales process? Our next guest started life as a shipyard electrician and got into sales because he wanted a free car. Those were the days. He's sold copiers for Canon and production publishing systems for Xerox to Xerox key accounts. However, he moved into training in 2000 and he's focused on driving sales performance, whether through Xerox TV, which he started and ran for 6 years, or through the decision-making cycle. The focus has always been on improving performance. So welcome to the Scale Your Sales podcast, Sam Robinson.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. So let's start with, how does sales enablement fit with improving performance?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a fair question because enablement is a very broad adjective and can be used to cover a multitude of sins. And very often within a commercial organisation, it's an adjective that's used to, let's enable something and throw it over the fence so that I get it off my desk. But I'm very clear about what we're trying to do. In sales enablement, our job is to help you be more effective and more efficient at selling something. It's not about making you a nicer, better person. You know, listen, I hope you do become that as a result of what we do, but that's not my primary focus. My primary focus is to be, how can we be more effective in driving the sale? So we look at how do we impact things like ramp time for onboarding. We look at attainment, how many people are actually reaching their number in a month or a quarter, and participation, how many people are actually playing in the full year. So we actually look at, so we try to affect those kind of metrics. And that's not to diss the work that people in sort of broader learning and development functions do, because they have a more sort of general audience do, but we have a specific swim lane. And I'm very clear with the team that I've got that that's what we're trying to drive against. It's to drive business performance.
Well, tell me more about the decision-making cycle.
Yeah, so the decision-making cycle is one of, it's a program that fits into a sort of triumvirate that we've got. We talk about skill set, mindset, and structure. So structural things will be things like Salesforce or Altify or Sixth Sense. They're some of the programs that you've got to help structure your selling process. Skill sets, we look at things like, for example, we use selling through curiosity, which helps us to upskill our sellers by improving the questioning technique. But the decision-making cycle, it understands that there are two people in this dance. There's ourselves and there's the customer. And that forces us to look quite specifically at life through the customer lens. So our CEO, Steve Hare, said at a recent kickoff meeting that we need to walk more effectively in our customers' shoes. And that's what this program is designed to do. It starts with the customer. The decision-making cycle we've branded as the buyer's mindset. So when we deliver it, we force the sellers to look at the deal, look at the opportunity, look at the account through the lens of the customer. Because all too often people get they think that being customer-centric is sort of lying back and letting the customer tickle your tummy. And most of us know, you know yourself, Janice, there are times when the customer's just flat out wrong. This idea that the customer is always right is nonsense. So, but we need to understand better what are the drivers. How do those drivers affect the gaps they've got in their business? How will our solution help plug those gaps, and how do we manage the anxieties that they might have? So that's the basic process.
It's interesting, we were talking about it previously, we were talking about objections, and actually this is more about the anxieties that buyers have. I've really got a thing with sales and the kind of macho terminology that's often bandied about, you know, crushing sales, objections, and it really dehumanizes the buyer, the customer, by the words that we use, and words are so important. What's your perspective on this?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, I mean, take that example of objection handling. You know, when we used to talk about the objection handler, we used to talk about somebody who was carried shoulder high through the village because they could do the great thing. They were feted as a great, they handled that objection beautifully. The decision-making cycle which drives the buyer's mindset, was developed in part by a guy called Dr. Kerry Evans, who has a fantastic book out just now called Perform Under Pressure. And he talks about this very topic. When he actually looked at objections from the customer's perspective, they were actually anxieties. Now, when I used to deliver this program about 10 years ago, people would say, I'm playing with language. You're just playing with words, Sam. You're just trying to fit that into your model.
And I presume it's also the language that they use as well. So if it's been really focused on their anxieties, then it's also ensuring that you're using their words, their language, really getting into their environment.
Yeah. And that's the thing that, I remember a line, the selling through curiosity methodology is licensed to us by a guy called Barry Ryan. And Barry ran the first workshops for us. And I remember when Barry was doing some deal reviews with us, the sellers were coming back saying the customer said this and the customer said that. And Barry would say, did the customer say that, or is that your interpretation of what the customer said? What did they actually say? And programs like that force us to actually, concentrate on it makes us better, because as sellers, we do get kind of lazy at it. We get into a rut, we get into a routine of the way we do things. And performing under pressure means that you have to be really focused and disciplined on how you get better. This is why I've often looked at some of the people in the classroom and said, do you have 10 years experience, or do you have 1 year 10 times? Have you actually developed and improved, or have you get into a rut? Because buyers are changing, buying habits are changing, buyers are more sophisticated, and we need to change along with them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Looking at the buyer's behavior, all the things that have changed. I think they're a good 2 years ahead of sellers. I don't know what your view is on whether salespeople have adapted enough to this changing environment.
Well, there was a quote in LinkedIn which said that buyers are advancing faster than sellers are adapting, and I think that's quite accurate. I do see that quite a bit, particularly at the start of the workshops. And please don't think I'm saying these workshops are the panacea to them, because there's a lot of work. I think there's much more focus needs to go into the post-workshop activities than the workshops themselves. But actually, from the buyer's perspective, they've got more access to information. Even I was actually reflecting on this. My last days of actually selling, which were in sort of 1998, 1999, there was an internet, but it wasn't populated with anything like the information the customer has access to now. And therefore, in my day, sort of brochure was king sort of thing. You didn't get information until I got what I wanted, then it was a trade-off, and so the dance went. Nowadays, they can be well round that cycle. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they have interpreted the information correctly. It just means to say that they are more informed than they were. Therefore, we need to up our game to that level. That needs to be our table stakes.
It's interesting, is social media a real enabler, or is it this kind of scourge, and having to change a lot of the resources to actually manage this whole new platform as a resource, but also a channel of information as well. And I think companies are finding it really difficult to kind of marry up what the people are actually saying, their sales force, what's on their website, and actually what's on their social channels, because I know buyers are finding there's a lot of inconsistencies between all of those three areas.
Well, that's a very good point, and that gives an example of, again, you talk about particularly the sort of social discourse part of it, the likes of the sort of Twitter feeds and these sort of things. That is unvetted information, and therefore is open to misinterpretation. And but again, that's why a seller needs to be better. That's why they need to be better at understanding the environment under which our customers exist. And I don't think that I actually do see a bit of a sea change in Sage around that, because we ran, my colleague Max and Como ran a great program around social selling, and we're seeing a huge increase in our social selling index as an organization. People are actually starting to see the power of using social as that route to market to engaging clients, but it does force you back to the basics.
I come across quite a few salespeople that have, you know, good 20 years of experience. You know, they know the sales process really well. And because buyers are advancing so much and so much of their information is gathered from the internet, so much of the way they communicate, whether it's through kind of WhatsApp, there's so many more millennials that are using these tools. There's a bit of a disconnect and a fear of the traditional salesperson in kind of using these tools, and how do they get on board? What do you do to help salespeople adapt?
That's a great point. So if you look at the right at the start, I said to you, we adopt this philosophy of skill set, mindset, structure. The point of that is to say that these three things are interconnected, and you have to be effective at using the platforms. You have to be skillful and you have to be mindful in order to drive performance. If you get those three things in balance, you'll move your performance up. That means that from a seller's perspective, sellers have to adapt. Now, if you think about, you talk about the seller who's got 20 years experience, for example, you know, how many years did Johnny Wilkinson kick a rugby ball over the posts? But every day he practiced kicking a ball over the posts. There's a massive difference between an experienced salesperson and an experienced athlete. In sales, we always love quoting these athletic case studies and say, oh, this athlete did this and that's how high performance occurred. But the athlete is absolutely maniacal about getting feedback on their performance. The seller will run away from feedback at 100 miles an hour. And that's the mindset that we need to work to change, because feedback is just useful information.
How do you see that things have changed or not? And what would you like to see?
I think there's been great strides made in diversity in two areas. I think we see more ethnic diversity, which is great. My previous job, I was in charge of global enablement for open text, and the beauty of that role was it gave me access to parts of the country which I simply wouldn't have visited in a normal sort of holiday type scenario. Yeah, I managed to get to Shanghai and to Tokyo and to parts of the US that are not on the sort of normal tourist trail. And it gave you insights into different people's mindsets and cultures and the way they work, and the rich beauty of getting that sort of feedback from, which helps develop me as an individual and allows me to bring those tales to the people that I teach. The other thing I see is the diversity. There are certainly more women involved in selling nowadays, which is a great thing as well. So there's been an awful lot said in that, but one of the things I read recently in a book by Matthew Said, he said we should be looking at diversity of thought as well.
I've got an issue with diversity of thought, I'm afraid, because I think, you know, as a Black woman, the more variety of people you have will naturally bring in a diversity of thought. My concern is when we focus on diversity of thought, we forget the basics, which is a diversity of a variety of people. And I've seen HR people use that as a cop-out. And, you know, like they're not recruiting a diversity of people from all different backgrounds and ethnic or gender, but they're saying that, well, we've got a diversity of thought in the room. How do you know? I mean, how do you know if everyone looks the same? You know?
That's why I said to you, Janice, I don't have an answer to this yet.
No. But I wanted to raise that because I've heard that come up quite a interesting article I read yesterday as well, and it was about how diversity has to go through all of the ranks, and this was in the film industry, really, you know, behind the camera, and how, you know, that really opens up the conversation, actually being open to bring in other people's experience. And I think that is a mindset, you know, that each one of us understand we have this kind of limitation of experience. And he was talking about this is, rather than being inclusion, it's talking about celebration. And we were going back to words, how important, how powerful words are. And if we were looking at it as a celebration, that brings in people. If we're looking at it as some of these words that we use, it's almost like a kind of tick box. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I think I would, I find nothing to challenge in what you've said there. apart from the fact that the example you gave where HR are using it as a cop-out, that's bad HR. That's not bad theory. You know, that's bad practice then. So that, you know, and that practice should be eradicated. I agree with you there. I think you're right. But you know, simple diversity of ethnicity or gender does not on itself guarantee diversity of thought. I think it should be part of the makeup. If someone's using it to exclude people, if they're saying, right, we're just going to hire that group, that racial profile, and we're putting it under the banner of diversity of thought, that's bad. That should be eradicated. That's not my contention. It's not my position. But I do think the idea of getting my team are one of them's 20 years younger than me. The rest of them are 25, 30 years younger than me. And that's great because they come at there's fresh ideas, fresh thoughts, fresh mindset, and they're not frightened to challenge me. And I think that's a good thing as well. Because although I said before the recording started that mentally I felt 28, I realised that I'm not. So, and I'm built up by that sort of colours as well. So I think that diversity, we're nowhere near the finish line, nowhere near it. But we're a lot further ahead of it than when I started working back in the 80s. In fact, if I took you all the way back to the shipyard, but you can get me started about that. So that's a whole different tale. That's probably for an evening podcast rather than one.
Yeah, I can imagine the language there.
Yeah, it was fruity. It was colourful. I think
it was colourful. But a great experience.
Yeah, that's so. Yeah. But I wouldn't swap. I mean, I don't regret it. I don't. It's sort of influenced and coloured the way I think about the world and think about life. So I think it was good.
And in some ways, it's a shame a lot that's been lost because you're talking about people that are the millennials and generation. There's a lot of that they will never know. They'll never know in the world that's changing. But on the other side, there's a lot of things that they, grasp really quickly and really easy that we're kind of slowly like catching up with. So it's really quite exciting, this dynamic of, things that are changing.
It is. And I think, there's lots to learn. It's easy to make fun of the millennials and the snowflakes and all these sort of things. And, don't get me wrong, I do it every possible opportunity, but they are not as they don't lack the resiliency that people think. As I say, my team are sort of millennials, and they can give as good as they get. It's fine, and that's good.
So what's one tried and tested strategy that you would offer listeners?
Focus on the basics. I have this mantra that I talk about world-class execution of the basics. When things start to go wrong for you, get back to the basics. We've just had the Rugby World Cup, just finished there, and I'm making no comments about how the teams performed, certainly not from a Scottish perspective. But when you actually look at what the coaches said, whenever somebody performed well, they always said, we were given a great platform of the basics, that allowed us to do A, B, and C. Whenever they performed poorly, they said, we just didn't execute on the basics, we need to get back to basics. And I think, particularly in the enablement world, there are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there trying to sell you solutions that are, this will help you build your pipeline by X% and drive productivity by Y%. And you just fundamentally work on executing the basics. The buyer's mindset, selling through curiosity, skill set, mindset, structure are all programs that are just focused relentlessly on the basics. You get the basics done, the rest will follow. You don't want to be relying on the Hail Mary pass every month or every quarter to make your number. You want to be and it's much more important to focus on the basics. We're coming in an organization which is moving rapidly to being a SaaS organization, which means that we can no longer rely on this sort of, the on-premise license is becoming a thing of the past. In a recurring revenue model, your focus has to be on the customer relentlessly, because they've got 30 days they can go somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're on a desert island, what's the one, because I've seen your list, one thing you take with you?
One thing you take, I did say to you, you say it was a list, but I said I wanted a solar powered iPod. But you've got to have something on it, Janice. You can't just have a solar powered iPod. And I was assuming, like the BBC programme, you would allow me to have the complete works of Shakespeare anyway, because they allow you to have that. But if you didn't, then you ask me to make a choice. I've already said I'm a gentleman of a certain age, so the complete works of Jethro Tull, the band from the 60s and 70s was their heyday, 60s, 70s and 80s was their heyday. That's what I am, and I'm not going to walk away from it, so I'll take that with me. Thank you.
It's yours. It's yours. So how can people get hold of you, Sam?
I'm on LinkedIn, so Sam Robinson at Sage, so they can get me there. That's fantastic. I'd happy for them to reach out to me there if they want to. Happy at any time to discuss and share experiences with fellow enablement professionals. Yeah, look forward to that.
Excellent. I'm sure a lot of them will contact you with the no nonsense. Let's get down to basics. This is what you need to do. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. It's been a great honor talking to you, Sam, and hopefully, you know, we can develop this further. So thank you for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast, Sam.
Thanks for the opportunity, Janice.